Hello and welcome back to the IT training video series. Again, my name is Jake Stupka. I'm the IT director for Pewauket Valley Schools. Today we're going to talk about another Google app and what is probably my favorite Google app, and that is Google Forms. Google Forms is an app with limitless possibilities. It's something I've used both professionally, I've used it personally, and it's one of my absolute favorites just because of its versatility. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do with Google Forms. So as usual, I'm signed in here to my email account. And in order to get to Google Forms, what I'm going to do is click on my apps browser just as normal. And I'm going to scroll down to look for the purple Google Forms icon, which is this one right here. When I click on that, it's going to take me to a very familiar looking page. It looks just like Docs, Sheets, and Slides, where it gives you sort of a template here at the top, or a blank option, and then shows you other forms that you already have available to you. So what we're going to do is do a blank form, and we're just going to talk about some of the basics. Now, Google Forms is as simple as it sounds. It's basically just a way to do an online quiz. There's a lot of different options. You can have the data plugged into a spreadsheet. You can receive email notifications when people respond, do lots of fun things. You'll notice here that in particular, there's a template here for an exit ticket, which is a pretty commonly used thing here in schools. So you can see there that they had that in mind when they created this. Simple assessments. There's blank quizzes, which are exactly like what they sound. You can actually determine the correct answer to certain questions, and then they'll auto grade themselves. Pretty neat, pretty awesome thing that you can have there. There's course evaluations, which would be like a sort of a rating of your job as a teaching professional or something like that. You know, if you had your kids take that to give you feedback about your class, whatever it may be. What we're going to do though is we're going to start with a blank form. And you'll notice that when the blank form comes up, it takes you right to what you're looking at. There's a number of things right off the bat that you're going to want to pay attention to. First of all, there's a title here. So we're going to do IT. Oh, here we go. If I can spell, IT training. All right. So we're going to do sample form. This is the title of your form. This would be a small description of the form. And then you can start adding questions. You'll notice that there's a toolbar here on the right-hand side. There's add a question. You can add a box that's just a description. You can add images. You can add a video. You can add a section to create what is essentially a page break. Adding a section in this case, what that actually does is it puts the different sections on different pages of the quiz. So the way it looks is when you add a section, for example, it gives you an arrow after the first question here, and then the arrow would take you to the next page of the quiz, which would have this next question here. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment as well. So we'll just do a little sample one here. And we'll say, did you learn anything today? And one of the neat things you'll notice here is that especially when you have different types of questions, you'll notice that there's different categories essentially. So we got multiple choice, checkboxes, drop downs, paragraphs, short answer, all kinds of stuff. Under multiple choice, it's got predictive text, and it can kind of learn, what you're talking about. You can actually add all of these different options just by clicking. So in other words, it recognizes the text that you wrote and gives you sample answers based on those options. So you can see that it just automatically added yes, no, maybe. You can actually add an image that goes with each of these answers. So for example, maybe it's a simple quiz and you want the kids to identify a specific animal or identify the part of a cell based on a picture of that part of the cell. You could add a picture to go with it so that they can associate that with the picture. So you'll notice that, like I said, that there's that picture right there. So we could do, we're going to say next part. I'm trying to spell here. Next part. Okay. So let me show you what that looks like with this section break right here. One of the most handy tools when you're creating a form like this is the preview button. That's this little eyeball up here, and essentially what that does is it takes you into a web page that shows you what your form will look like to people who are filling it out. So when I click on that, it's going to open a new tab, and then this is what it'll look like. Okay, did you learn anything today? Yes. And then you'll remember we put in that next section So that next section essentially means that question is going to appear on the next page. So when I hit this next button, I'll see the next section. Okay, then you hit submit and everything like that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this tab. I'm going to go back to the forms. Some other things you can do, you can actually pick color palettes. I could pick specific colors if I want. Okay, go to red. You can also pick some themes that are based on pictures. Okay, so there's a few different themes here. For those of you who've done some work with Google Classroom, you'll probably notice that some of these themes are pretty familiar. A lot of them are the same as in Google Classroom, so that's always a handy thing to have. You can make them all match. Stars there, for example. And then once you're in the editing part of the form, you'll notice that there's the questions part, which is where you're building it. And then you can go to responses, and you can do several things here. You can turn accepting responses on and off, so you can quickly disable your form from being used if you need to make a quick edit, re-enable it, and then people can fill it out again. You'll notice that there's actually a space here. This is where the responses will appear, and actually they come up in a graph. That graph will give you quick insights about stuff, like the number of people who answered yes versus no on question number 1, for example. Okay, there's a couple other settings here as well that are really, really important, especially if you're using these for things like quizzes. For example, these two options here, restrict to Pojoaque Valley Schools users and limit to 1 response. Both of those options would mean that whoever it is who's filling it out has to sign into their Pojoaque Schools Google Apps account in order to use it. That means students can do it, but they'll only be able to fill it out once as they sign into their Google Apps account. You can also select these options here, edit after submit, and then see a summary. Those may or may not be appropriate based on what you're exactly doing. Okay. You can also check these boxes, show link to submit another response. If you've got somebody who's entering data points, for example, and you want them to quickly get back to the beginning of the form to enter different data points, you might leave that checked. You can shuffle the question order if it's a quiz. You can show the progress bar if you're concerned about it being a longer one and you want to make sure people know how much there is left. You can customize the response here at the bottom to say, thank you for participating in my quiz. I appreciate your feedback, something like that. Okay, and then these ones are specific to quizzes. If you check this, it gives you those options, as I mentioned before, to actually add point values and determine correct answers for certain questions, and then it will self-grade after it's submitted. So you can actually see your score immediately after you're done. You don't have to hand grade these. Now, a couple other things that I want to talk about as well. This video is going to be a little bit on the shorter side, but the next thing we're going to talk about is advanced Google Forms tools. In particular, I'm going to talk about something called Choice Eliminator. Choice Eliminator is a really, really powerful and very handy tool, and I'll have a personal story about how I've used it, but that's going to be in the next video, which will be sort of the part 2 to this Google Forms video. But again, this has just been an introduction to Google Forms. Like many of the other Google Apps tools, it's one that has pretty infinite possibilities, and there really isn't a determined way for you to use this. It's more about how can you apply your ideas creatively to this tool and really take it to the next level and use it, for things that it's never been used for before. Again, this has been an introduction to Google Forms, and I hope to see you in the next video where we're going to talk about some advanced tools, and we will see you next time.